I stood at the podium in that boardroom with 47 people staring at me, and my father laughed. Not a quiet laugh, not a polite, awkward cough. He threw his head back and laughed the way men laugh when they think they've already won. "She doesn't even have a degree," he said to his lawyer, loud enough for the entire room to hear. "What is she going to tell us about our own company?" His lawyer, a man named Fordham, silver-haired, expensive suit, didn't laugh. He just looked at me with that particular kind of pity that rich men reserve for people they consider beneath them. I set my folder on the podium and looked at my father. I did not smile. I did not flinch. Because I already knew something he didn't. Let me go back to the beginning, not the dramatic beginning, not the boardroom, not the moment everything fell apart for him. The real beginning. The one that actually explains everything. I grew up in a house that looked perfect from the outside. Colonial style, white shutters, a Japanese maple in the front yard that my mother planted the year I was born. From the street it looked like the kind of house where a family ate dinner together and talked about their days. And sometimes we did. But mostly what I remember is learning very early that in our family there was a hierarchy, and I was at the bottom of it. My brother, older by 4 years, was the one my father had always wanted. He was the one who got the car at 16, the one who got sent to the good university, the one who got brought into the family business at 22 like it was his birthright. He sat beside my father at Sunday dinners and they talked about quarterly earnings and golf handicaps while I passed the breadbasket and tried to disappear. My mother was different with me in private. She would hold my face in her hands sometimes and say things like, "You have something he doesn't understand yet." But at the table, in front of my father, she went quiet. She had been going quiet for 30 years by then. It was a habit she'd worn so long it had become her personality. I was 23 when I graduated from a state school my father called fine for what it is. I had a degree in finance. I had a 3.9 GPA. I had an internship that turned into a job offer at a small investment firm in the city. A firm called Meridian Capital Partners that most people in my father's circle had never heard of. "It's a start," my father said when I told him. Then he turned back to his newspaper. My brother was already a vice president at Callaway Industries, our family's company, built by my grandfather and expanded by my father into a regional manufacturing conglomerate. 60 million in annual revenue. Factories in 3 states. My father had been grooming my brother to take it over since he was 12 years old. I was not part of that plan. I had never been part of that plan. So I left. I took my job at Meridian. I moved into a studio apartment on the 4th floor of a building where the elevator worked, maybe 60% of the time. I ate a lot of pasta and a lot of canned soup. I worked 70 hours a week. My boss, a woman named Cecile who wore the same 4 blazers in rotation and had the sharpest analytical mind I have ever encountered, saw something in me in the first 3 months and started teaching me things that were not in any textbook. She taught me how to read a balance sheet the way a doctor reads an X-ray. Not just the numbers, but what the numbers were hiding. She taught me how distressed assets work, how companies that look healthy from the outside can be rotting underneath if you know what to look for. She taught me patience. She said the best moves look like nothing until suddenly they look like everything. I was 25 when I made my first significant investment, 27 when Meridian promoted me to senior analyst, 29 when Cecile quietly handed me the reins of a new fund she was spinning off. A private equity vehicle focused exclusively on distressed mid-market companies. We called it Lakeshore Holdings. I was 31 when Lakeshore Holdings acquired its 15th company. I had not spoken to my father in 2 years by then. The silence between us started at my grandmother's funeral. This is the part that still sits in my chest sometimes, heavy and unprocessed. My grandmother, my father's mother, had a document prepared. Not quite a will, more like a letter of intent, handwritten, outlining her wish that a small piece of property she owned in the mountains be left to me specifically. It wasn't worth much. Maybe 200,000 on a good day, but it had been in her family for 3 generations and she had taken me there every summer as a child, and I had assumed, stupidly, I know now, that the paperwork would handle itself. It didn't. My brother found the letter first. He was the executor. He told my father told his estate attorney. And by the time the estate closed, the property had been folded into a trust that my brother controlled, with a note in the file that said, my grandmother's wishes had been informally documented and therefore had no legal standing. I found out at the reception after the funeral. My aunt, my father's sister, a woman who had always been quietly kind to me, pulled me aside in the kitchen and told me in a low voice, her eyes on the doorway the whole time. I walked to where my father was standing with my brother and two of their girlfriends. Dad, I said, can I talk to you for a minute? He looked at me the way people look at someone who has interrupted something important. Not now, sweetheart. It's about Grandma's property. He looked at me for a moment. Then he looked at my brother. Something passed between them that I was not meant to see, but I saw it anyway. That's been handled, my father said. The estate is settled. She wanted me to have it. She wanted a lot of things. He picked up his drink. That's not how estates work. I stood there for another few seconds. My brother had turned slightly away from me, studying something on the far wall. My mother was across the room, holding a plate she wasn't eating from. I said quietly, so only my father could hear, I know what you did. He looked at me then. Really looked at me. And what I saw in his face was not guilt. It was irritation, like I was a small inconvenience that had just become a slightly larger one. Don't make a scene at your grandmother's funeral, he said. I left 20 minutes later. I did not call him for 2 years. He did not call me either. I want to be honest about those 2 years, because I think people expect this part of the story to be triumphant, like I had this clean clarity of purpose, and I just went off and built an empire with my jaw set and my eyes on the horizon. It wasn't like that. It was lonely. I worked constantly because work was the only place where the rules made sense to me. I went on 3 dates in 2 years. I called my mother on her birthday and on Christmas, and she always sounded like she was standing in a room where someone might walk in at any moment. My aunt sent me a card every few months. That was mostly it. What I did have was the work, and I was good at it in a way that had started to feel almost unfair, the way some people are inexplicably good at languages or chess. I could look at a company's financials and understand within 40 minutes where the real pressure points were. I could sit in a room with a management team and know within the first 10 minutes which ones were hiding something. Callaway Industries started appearing on my radar about 18 months before the boardroom scene I started with. It came across my desk the way these things do, through a broker who had a client looking to offload a minority stake quietly. Before things got worse, I didn't connect it to my family at first. The file used the parent holding company name, which my father had changed twice since I was a teenager for tax purposes. When I realized what company it was, I sat very still for a long time. Then I called Cecile. Tell me what you see, she said. She always said that first. I told her what I saw: deteriorating margins in the core manufacturing division, a real estate holding that was mortgaged past its useful value, a line of credit that had been extended 3 times in 4 years, a management team making optimistic projections that did not match the underlying numbers, a company that from the outside looked like a $60 million operation but was, if you traced it carefully, sitting on approximately $22 million in unsecured debt that would come due in rolling tranches over the next 18 months. And the ownership structure? Cecile asked. I told her. There was a pause. Do you want to walk away from this one? She asked. She wasn't being rhetorical. She genuinely meant it as an option. No, I said. Okay, she said. Then let's be very careful. What followed took 11 months. I am not going to pretend it was all smooth and strategic. There were weeks where I thought I was wrong about the timeline. Weeks where I second-guessed whether I was doing this for legitimate business reasons or for something uglier that I didn't want to name. Cecile would not let me operate from anger. She had a rule about that, stated plainly: emotion makes you sloppy. You can feel whatever you want after the deal closes. Lakeshore Holdings acquired the majority of Callaway Industries' debt through a series of secondary market purchases. Some of it came through a distressed debt fund, some through a broker in Atlanta who specialized in exactly this kind of quiet accumulation. We used a holding vehicle called Thornfield Asset Management, a name I had chosen deliberately for reasons that were personal and that I kept to myself. My father and my brother did not know that Thornfield was mine. Nobody knew. That was the point. The first time my father's lawyer, Fordham, called Thornfield to negotiate a restructuring timeline, he spoke to one of our associates. He was polite. He was confident. He thought he was dealing with a fund that would be reasonable, that would work with the family to preserve the business, that would ultimately take a haircut on the debt in exchange for a clean exit. He was not wrong that we would be reasonable. He was wrong about everything else. By the time Callaway Industries Board realized the full scope of what was happening, that a single entity now controlled enough of their debt structure to force a restructuring that would effectively transfer operational control, it was too late for the quiet conversations. My brother's calls to his banking contacts came back empty. The credit lines they thought they could extend had already been quietly acquired. Every door they tried led back to the same door. Thornfield requested a formal meeting with the Callaway Industries Board. My father assumed he was going to sit across the table from a fund manager, a professional, someone he could negotiate with, intimidate, charm, outmaneuver, the way he had operated in every business situation for 40 years. He walked into that boardroom and saw me standing at the podium. That laugh. I need to describe it properly because it's important. It started as surprise. His face actually went slack for a moment, which I had never seen before in my life. My father had a face that was always composed, always performing competence. The slack look lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then the laugh came, and it was loud and it was meant for the room. It was a social laugh. A laugh that was saying to everyone present, "Can you believe this? Can you believe she's here? What is this?" he said. He looked at Fordham. "What is she doing here?" Fordham was looking at the folder I had placed on the conference table in front of each seat. He had opened his. He was reading the first page. "She doesn't even have a degree," my father said. This was the line I mentioned at the beginning. He was wrong. I had a degree, but he had decided long ago that state schools didn't count as degrees in any meaningful sense, and he had apparently not updated that belief. "What is she going to tell us about our own company?" Nobody in the room laughed with him. Fordham looked up from the folder. He had the expression of a man who has just understood something he wishes he hadn't. "Sir," Fordham said quietly, "you need to read this." My father looked at him. Then he looked at me. Then he looked at my brother, who was seated to his left and had gone a color I had never seen on a human face before, a kind of gray-white, like paper that has gotten wet. "Dad," my brother said, and his voice was strange, flat, like the air had gone out of it. My father picked up the folder. I watched him read. I had spent 11 months preparing for this moment, and I had imagined it many ways. His anger, his bluster, his attempts to reframe the situation, his negotiating tactics. What I had not fully prepared for was the way he looked when he finally understood. The composure didn't crack all at once. It went slowly, like a wall that develops a single fracture that then spreads in every direction. He set the folder down. "This is you," he said. "Not a question." "Thornfield Asset Management is mine, yes," I said. "Has been for 3 years. You bought our debt. Lakeshore Holdings acquired it through secondary markets over approximately 11 months. All transactions were legal and properly disclosed to your lenders under the terms of your credit agreements. Fordham can confirm." Fordham did not confirm out loud. He was still reading. "Why?" my father said. I had thought about how to answer this question. I had written and discarded probably 15 versions. In the end, I said the simplest thing, the true thing. "Because Grandma wanted me to have something," I said. "And you took it. And I decided that the next time we sat in a room together, the terms would be mine." The room was very quiet. My brother put his head in his hands. There were 7 other people at that table. 2 independent board members, 2 of my father's senior managers, a corporate attorney, and a financial consultant my father had brought in to advise on the restructuring. None of them said anything. My father looked at me for a long time. I have tried many times to describe what was in his face, and I cannot do it accurately. There was anger, yes. There was something I can only call recognition. Like he was seeing something in me he had always known was there and had spent years pretending wasn't. And there was something else that I think, if I am being honest, was the hardest part for me. Something that looked almost like grief. I did not let myself feel sorry for him. I had not come this far to feel sorry for him. I opened my own folder. The restructuring proposal is on page 4, I said. Lakeshore is prepared to convert a portion of the debt to equity, which would give Thornfield a controlling stake in the company. The alternative is a full enforcement action, which Fordham can walk you through, but the outcome is significantly less favorable for existing shareholders. I paused. I'd suggest reading page 4. My father did not read page 4. He stood up. His chair scraped back. For one moment, I genuinely did not know what he was going to do. He looked like a man who was deciding between several options, none of them good. Then he straightened his jacket. He picked up his phone from the table. He walked out of the boardroom. My brother stayed seated. His hands were still on the table, flat, like he was trying to feel the surface beneath them. "Did you plan this from the beginning?" he asked. His voice was quiet, not hostile, just genuinely asking. "Not from the beginning," I said. "From the day I found out what you did with Grandma's property." "Yes." He nodded slowly. He looked down at the folder. "Are you going to run the company?" he asked. "I'm going to restructure it. Then I'm going to install new management." I paused. "You can stay on in an operational capacity if the new team agrees you're an asset. That's not my decision to make." "It kind of is, though." "Yes," I said. "I suppose it is." My mother called me that night. I was in my hotel room. I had flown in that morning and I was flying back the following day. I almost didn't pick up. We had been doing our careful, quiet calls for 2 years by then, the ones where we said the surface things and left everything underneath untouched. But I picked up. "I heard," she said. "I waited. I knew you were going to do something," she said. "I didn't know what, but I knew." She was quiet for a moment. "You sounded like yourself today, someone told me." She paused. "You sounded like someone who had stopped apologizing." I sat on the edge of the hotel bed and I didn't say anything for a while. "Are you angry with me?" I asked. "For what happened to the company?" "No," she said. She said it immediately, with no hesitation, and it was the most decisive I had ever heard her sound. "No, I'm not angry with you." She didn't say anything else about it, and neither did I. We talked for 40 minutes about smaller things. About her garden. About a novel she was reading. About the fact that the Japanese maple in the front yard had been struggling that summer and she wasn't sure why. When we hung up, I sat there for a long time. I am not going to tell you the ending of this story ties up the way it does in movies. My father did not come to me with a speech about how he had been wrong. My brother did not become someone different overnight. The company went through an 18-month restructuring under the new management team I brought in. My brother left voluntarily, which I think was the right decision for everyone. My father and I have spoken 4 times since the boardroom. The conversations are short, careful. Something has shifted in them. Not warmth exactly, but a kind of honesty that wasn't possible before, now that there's nothing left to perform for each other. Once, near the end of one of these calls, he said, "You're good at this." He said it the way people say things they have been holding a long time, like putting down something heavy. I said, "I know." And I meant it without apology. That's the part I want to leave you with. Not the revenge. Though I understand why that's the part that reads as satisfying. It was satisfying. But what I think about more is the 10 years between my grandmother's funeral and that boardroom. The nights in the studio apartment with the elevator that didn't work. The 70-hour weeks. The 3 dates in 2 years. The calls with my mother where we talked around everything that mattered. All of it was real. All of it was mine. Nobody gave me any of it. And when I walked out of that boardroom, past Fordham, who was still reading, past the 2 board members who would not meet my eyes, into the hallway with its thick carpet and its climate control and its complete ordinary silence, I didn't feel triumphant the way I had imagined. I felt something simpler. I felt like myself. Like the person my mother had seen in me when I was young and couldn't see in myself yet. Like something that had been waiting a very long time had finally been given permission to stand up straight. I took the elevator down to the lobby. I walked out into the afternoon. I called Cecile. "It's done," I said. "How do you feel?" she asked. I thought about it honestly for a moment. "Ready," I said, "for whatever's next." She laughed. Good, she said. Because I have another deal I want to show you. I hailed a cab. The city moved around me the way cities do, indifferent and loud and entirely unconcerned with what had just happened on the 14th floor of a building 3 blocks back. I looked out the window and I thought about my grandmother's maple tree at the mountain property that was no longer mine. I thought about my mother's maple tree in the front yard that was struggling and she didn't know why. I made a mental note to find someone who did. I've thought a lot about what people expect this kind of story to mean. I think most people want it to be about revenge, about getting even, about making someone feel what they made you feel. And I'd be lying if I said that wasn't part of it. When my father picked up that folder and his face changed, I felt something real. I'm not going to dress it up as something more noble than it was. But here's what I've actually learned, sitting with it now. The revenge was never the point. It was a byproduct. What I was actually doing for 10 years was building something true. Something that couldn't be taken from me the way a piece of mountain property could be taken, the way a seat at the table could be denied. I was building competence so deep and so real that no amount of dismissal could touch it. My father dismissed me my entire life, not because I was weak. He dismissed me because it was convenient, because it kept the story simple. The son inherits, the daughter steps aside. I let that story live in my head longer than I should have. I took his version of me and I carried it around like it was fact. That's the part that cost me the most, honestly. Not the property, not the exclusion. The years I spent half believing him. What changed wasn't a single moment of clarity. It was Cecile handing me a financial file at 25 and saying, "Tell me what you see," meaning, "Trust your own reading of this." It was 70-hour weeks that turned into actual expertise. It was the slow accumulation of being right, repeatedly, in situations where being right had real consequences. You can't fake that. No one can give it to you, and no one can take it away. That's the thing about building real skill. It doesn't care what your father thinks of your university. What I want people to understand about the boardroom moment is that I wasn't angry when I walked in. I had been angry for years, but by then I had done the work, methodically, carefully, without shortcuts, and the anger had burned itself into something else, something quieter, something that felt honestly more like clarity than fury. People talk about integrity like it's about being a good person in obvious situations, but I think the real test of it is what you build when no one is watching, when there's no reward coming, when the people who should have believed in you have made it clear they don't. That decade in the background, the studio apartment, the pasta dinners, the nights I wondered if I was wrong about everything, that was integrity, not the boardroom. The boardroom was just where it became visible. My father said, "You're good at this," near the end of one of our calls. He said it like it cost him something. I think it did. I think it cost him a version of himself he had held on to for a long time, the version that had me figured out, categorized, set aside. I said, "I know," not to be cruel, because it was simply true, and I had spent too long not being able to say it plainly. That's the thing I'd want anyone to take from this. Not the money. Not the company. The part where I finally stopped apologizing for knowing what I knew,